Hi, I'm Dr. Rebecca Bryan, and I'd like to talk through how we can help kids to regulate themselves by understanding Bruce Perry's brain states and Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. So I'm going to start with the latter. My hand here is representing the brain. The lowest part of my wrist is the spinal cord. The palm is the reptilian brain, or what's called the survival brain. It's below any thought processes, but it has a lot to do with bodily sensations. And then if you fold your thumb in, that's the emotional brain. This is where emotions are processed and also memory is stored. And then if you fold your fingers over, this is the cortex. This is the calm, rational thinking brain. This is the last part of the brain that forms. This is the first part of the brain that forms. We are always functioning out of one of these three states. So we like to think that we're calm all the time, and I think Western society tells us that we should always be rational. But the truth is, what's the first thing that happens when we get upset? We flip our lids. And we're either functioning out of our emotional brains, or if we're really deeply in fear or experiencing terror, we may be functioning out of that lowest survival part of the brain. This information applies as much to us adults as it does to the youth with whom we engage. And so it's very important to start noticing what brain state you're functioning from. For instance, again, you may think, well, I'm a mature adult. I am always calm and rational. But what if you're really hungry? What if you didn't get to eat breakfast and lunch because you were too busy and you're hangry, right? Or what if you are just carrying into a situation all this stress? Then chances are you're not so much functioning out of this calm, alert state. You might well be functioning out of this emotional brain state. Or if you think that something is threatening, like a job loss or again, overwhelming responsibility, something like this, you might even be functioning out of that survival mode. I just think of the times we all went through during the pandemic, when it was all that we could do to manage what was on our plates each day, particularly those of us who are in service industry and work closely with others in the public setting. So we can use this information because when a child or us is functioning out of our survival brain, what we need to do is we need to regulate before we can relate, before we can reason. So how this looks like in kids is, if a kid really starts acting out, they start yelling or touching people a lot, or they won't sit still, or maybe even really bad, they start throwing a chair or something like that. The first thing we're tempted to say is, stop that behavior now. If you don't stop that, you're not going to be able to go on the trip. The problem is they're not thinking in the future. They're not functioning out of this calm brain that's allowing them to think 2 days from now or a week from now, or even what consequences are. They are in the realm of sensation. And so we need to utilize sensation to get them to regulate. Common ways to do this would be to encourage, if you can, a big deep breath, to let them use their large muscles, so taking a walk with them, handing them a drink, particularly if it's a cold drink. For some reason, if it's in a straw, drank through a straw, that can allow the brain to pause and allow that lid to begin to come back down. Once they have demonstrated that they are into their emotional brain, usually at that point they can use words better and they can express that in some kind of way. And so at that point you relate with them. You say, I see you're having a really difficult time. I'm sorry this has been so difficult for you. I want to be there for you. What would help you? Something like that. Just acknowledging where they are. And then finally, when their lid fully comes back down, that's to the point where they can begin to, they're calmer. You can see it in their body. You can engage with them in that way. And that's the place where you can talk about consequences, but you can also, more importantly, talk about what happened in a thoughtful way and maybe how to prevent it from happening the next time. So an example of this for me was when I was working at Urban Promise Ministries in Camden. I had a 5th grader who was extremely upset in the office. I could tell that because I went to touch him briefly and he flinched away from me, so I could tell he was functioning out of this low survival brain. I offered to take him outside. We went outside together, and as I stood in the center of the playground, he ran around and around and around me for about 5 minutes. That was his body. He knew that he had to regulate himself by using large muscles of his legs. And all he kept saying was, I can't believe I got in so much trouble, and they're gonna call my mother, and when they call that mother, she's gonna be even more upset with me. It was not my fault, and just around and around. But then he paused, and he looked at me and he said, Miss Becky, you're really nice. Do you wanna go on the seesaw with me? I knew at that point that he had moved from regulation to relation. And I said, yes, I'd love to go on the seesaw with you. And while we were on the seesaw, I said, you have had a bad day. What is going on? I'm so sorry that you're having such a bad day. I hate it when kids feel so badly, but I didn't ever try to have him explain much or give him consequences yet. So we seesawed again for a few minutes, and then at one point he stopped the seesaw at the top. He looked around at the sky and he said, it is a beautiful day outside. Then I knew that his lid had come back down. And it was at that point that we talked about what had happened the night before, because there had been stress at home, and then that morning, what had happened in the classroom, and how could we notice what his body was sensing before we even added the words of emotion, to then talk about how could we prevent this from happening in the future. And at that point, we were able to go back into the classroom and he could return. I share that because we have the ability to do that with anybody that we engage with. But what's important is that we are aware of our brain state first. Are we functioning out of survival? Are we exhausted? Are we functioning out of emotions? Do we need sleep or do we need to eat? Or are we in a place where we can be calm and we can engage thoughtfully? And then we can help others assess where they are. Actually, using the hand model of the brain is really helpful, and using our calmness to help guide them through. It's when their storm meets our calm that co-regulation occurs. And when we are intentional and aware about this, we can help others just like we can help ourselves. Hope that's helpful for you. Take care.